Diplomacy has failed. The sword must now preserve our independence. With that message sent to Confederate General Pierre-Gustave Touton-Beauregard, the final chance for peace slipped away. Fort Sumter, stationed in Charleston Harbor, had not been evacuated by the deadline set by Confederate authorities. Surrounding the isolated Union fort were nearly 6,000 Southern troops. Cannons and mortars lined the harbor, all trained on the small garrison holding the position. At 4:30 in the morning on April 12, 1861, a gunner stationed at Fort Johnson fired a 10-inch mortar shell high into the pre-dawn sky. The explosion above Fort Sumter lit the darkness in a flash of fire. In that moment, the American Civil War began. Inside the fort, Union soldiers rushed to their posts, scrambling to prepare for the bombardment. Across Charleston, civilians climbed rooftops and balconies, eager to witness what many believed would be a brief and decisive confrontation. One by one, Confederate batteries opened fire. Soon, every available gun in the harbor was unleashing shells at the Union position. The Union garrison, undermanned and undersupplied, returned fire as best they could. Their resistance was brave but limited. The Confederate bombardment continued relentlessly through the day and into the night. At one point, the fort's roof caught fire, sending smoke billowing into the sky. Still, the defenders refused to surrender. Confederate troops, impressed by the determination of their enemies, even cheered whenever Sumter's guns answered back. Admiration, however, did not slow the assault. On the afternoon of April 13th, a Confederate shot struck the flagpole, snapping it and sending the Union flag crashing down. The symbolic blow was followed by urgent negotiations. Terms were eventually agreed upon. The Union garrison would evacuate the fort. After firing a final salute to their battered flag, the soldiers departed. The Confederacy had secured the first victory of the war. The political consequences were immediate. On April 15th, President Abraham Lincoln called for 75,000 militia volunteers to suppress what he described as an illegitimate rebellion. The call to arms pushed the remaining slave states toward secession. Lincoln soon requested 40,000 more troops for extended service. Confederate President Jefferson Davis responded with a call for 100,000 volunteers of his own. At this early stage, neither side believed the war would last long. Some Southerners had hoped the attack on Fort Sumter would force the Union into negotiations rather than prolonged conflict. They knew they were outnumbered, but they believed resolve and leadership could offset Northern advantages. The Union, however, had its own problems. Lincoln faced skepticism from within his cabinet and military leadership. Many senior officers were elderly, in poor health, or considered ineffective. Selecting capable commanders proved difficult. Still, strategies had to be formed. One of the earliest came from Lieutenant General Winfield Scott. His proposal, later known as the Anaconda Plan, called for a defensive shield around Washington, a naval blockade of the southern coastline, and control of the Mississippi River to split the Confederacy in two. The goal was to strangle the Southern war effort economically and logistically. Though politically unpopular at first, elements of the plan would eventually prove decisive. By late May, Union forces had crossed the Potomac River and seized Arlington Heights. Skirmishes began erupting regularly. The first notable land battle came on June 10, 1861, at Big Bethel in Virginia. Union forces hoped to secure a defensive buffer near Fort Monroe, but suffered a defeat due to poor coordination. The loss reinforced the perception that Confederate commanders held the early advantage. There was, however, a political victory for the Union. Northwestern counties of Virginia voted to break away and form a new pro-Union state, which would become West Virginia. Encouraged, Union leadership turned toward a bold objective: capture Richmond, the Confederate capital, and end the war swiftly. General Irvin McDowell marched south with 35,000 men, the largest army yet assembled on the continent. Civilians followed the troops carrying picnic baskets, expecting a spectacle and a quick victory. Instead, they would witness the first battle of Bull Run. McDowell's army consisted largely of inexperienced volunteers. Their target was the key railroad junction at Manassas, near Bull Run Stream. Confederate forces under Beauregard prepared defenses, while reinforcements under General Joseph E. Johnston moved to support him. Union General Robert Patterson had been tasked with stopping Johnston, but failed, allowing Confederate reinforcements to slip through. The battle began on July 21, 1861. McDowell attempted a flanking maneuver while staging a diversion at Stone Bridge. In theory, the plan was solid. In practice, inexperienced troops executed it poorly. Confederate Colonel Nathan Evans recognized the feint and repositioned his men to confront the real threat. Though outnumbered, he stalled the Union advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. As Confederate lines wavered on Henry House Hill, General Bernard B. rallied his men by pointing to Brigadier General Thomas Jackson, holding firm. "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." The nickname stuck. Reinforced Southern troops counterattacked, capturing Union artillery and pushing Northern forces back. By late afternoon, the Union Army was in retreat. What began as an orderly withdrawal collapsed into panic. Soldiers and civilians fled together toward Washington. Bull Run was a humiliating defeat for the Union and a morale-boosting victory for the Confederacy. The loss damaged Lincoln politically. As the war intensified, his administration imposed censorship on mail, telegraphs, and newspapers. Suspected Confederate sympathizers risked arrest. Critics accused him of overreach. Meanwhile, abolitionists pressured Lincoln to make slavery the central issue of the war. Lincoln hesitated, focused primarily on preserving the Union. Instead, he approved the Confiscation Act of 1861, allowing Union forces to seize property used in rebellion, including enslaved people, many of whom were then used as laborers supporting Union infrastructure. Fighting soon spread westward. On August 10, 1861, Union General Nathaniel Lyon engaged Confederate Generals Ben McCulloch and Sterling Price at Wilson's Creek in Missouri. Both sides had planned surprise attacks, but weather disrupted Confederate plans, giving the Union the initial advantage. Fierce fighting erupted at Bloody Hill and lasted for hours. Confederate counterattacks eventually broke Union flanking forces. Lyon, already wounded, was killed in action. With ammunition low and pressure mounting, Union troops retreated. The Confederacy secured another victory. The Union gained a much-needed success at sea when naval forces captured Fort Clark and Fort Hatteras along the Carolina coast after heavy bombardment forced Confederate surrender. But setbacks continued on land. In September, Sterling Price advanced on Lexington, Missouri. After besieging Union defenders and cutting supplies, Confederate troops forced their surrender, capturing the city. Another disaster struck in October at Ball's Bluff, Virginia. A poorly planned Union operation led by Colonel Baker ended in catastrophe. Union troops were trapped against the Potomac River. Many were killed, captured, or drowned attempting escape. Baker himself was slain. The defeat triggered political outrage. General Stone was arrested and accused of treason, while General McClellan, though criticized, would soon rise to overall command. International tensions also escalated. Great Britain, economically tied to Southern cotton, showed quiet sympathy toward the Confederacy. Confederate envoys were sent aboard the British ship Trent to seek recognition. In November 1861, a U.S. naval captain intercepted the vessel and seized the envoys, sparking diplomatic outrage in Britain. War between the Union and Britain suddenly seemed possible. Unwilling to risk a second conflict, Lincoln's administration released the prisoners and eased the crisis diplomatically. By the end of 1861, any illusion of a short war had vanished. The Confederacy had secured early battlefield successes, while the Union grappled with military defeats, political division, and leadership struggles. Yet the North retained key advantages in manpower, industry, and naval strength. The conflict that began with a single mortar shell over Fort Sumter had grown into a vast and brutal war, one that would determine the future of the United States.